Today's conversation is sponsored by the Billy Keels Advisory Program. If you want to learn more about how to make your 9 to 5 optional, just go to billykeels.com/advising. Once again, that's billykeels.com/advising.
You're listening to the Going Long podcast, the #1 podcast for the strategies, tactics, and actions high wage earners need for living an intentionally designed life of wealth and resilience.
Welcome to the Going Long podcast. We're back once again to continue to help to educate you so that you feel much more comfortable as well as confident in building the wealthy and resilient life that you're looking to build and do that much, much faster. My name is Billy Keels and I'm the host of the show, and I'm really welcoming you back to another episode. So really looking forward to that. And as I always do, I like to say from the very beginning, a big thank you to those of you that continue to come back, that continue to watch, that continue to listen, and leave your honest written reviews as well as ratings. Really appreciate that. Helps us to stay in the top 1.5% of podcasts globally, and that's over 400 and some odd episodes at this point in time. So thank you so much for that. Also, thank you for those of you who continue to tag us across social media, specifically on LinkedIn and on Instagram. It's fantastic. I would love making the connections with you there as well. And for anyone who wants to go back, if you're enjoying the episode, you want to listen to some previous episodes, just go to billykeels.com/podcast and you can find every single episode we've ever done, all the transcripts, all the videos, all the audios, all that kind of stuff. So billykeels.com/podcast. So today is one of the things that, every single week I am speaking to high paid executives, people that are, usually making over $200,000 a year in US dollars or the equivalent outside of the US. And then also small business owners. And, a lot of the small business owners have companies that are doing anywhere between $1 million to $5 million a year in terms of turnover. And it's amazing that these individuals that I'm speaking to week after week after week, there are these specific patterns that I start to see. We talk to people, and there's another pattern that I've kind of pulled out that I've recognized that happens along the lines, especially when you're in corporate. And I draw a lot of it because it happened to me in corporate specifically, like this one thing specifically happened. And a lot of times when you come from a middle-class background, like I did, lower middle class background, and then you make it to this like executive, or you make it to this small business owner that's being working well and having great revenue and starting to become profitable and all these types of things, you realize that you didn't just get there overnight, and there were patterns that you've had to break from your past in order to get where you are today, and you want to move even further. But specifically, one thing happens after you have kids, right? And when I hear this story over and over, it just makes me want to stop and share this with you, because I remember I was a early father, right? I had my first kid, we had our first kid, I was 36, something like that. So around 38, I was starting to realize like, hey, things are going well. Things are moving in the right direction. I was, as a corporate leader, continuing to move up the ladder. At home, I was there and I was present. I was making money. And because I was from a lower middle class family, like that was a really big deal, because I knew that being able to have the financial means that was going to help and did help my family accomplish and do the things that we really wanted to do. At the same time, I wanted to be present. So there's always like this contradiction that's happening with, especially if you're from lower middle class, and then all of a sudden you get to this like, wow, you're making more money than you ever knew what to do with. And all the time, I wanted to be the husband of the year, the father of the year, the top employee. I wanted to be doing all of these things. And at the same time, I remember something happened, and this is one of the things that we talk about, is once you have kids and you are also wanting to continue to perform at a high level, be present, network, meet people, create relationships, there's this thing that happens, is that you have to be on transportation. Now, this is pre-pandemic, so there wasn't as much of the like everybody video conferencing and stuff like that. But as you start to travel around the world, or someone like me, I mean, I've traveled to 87 countries and I enjoy traveling. I love traveling. But there was this thing that happened, and the thing that I hear in so many of the different calls is, I got to a certain point that I remember after having our first son, the very first flight that I took, that was like a longer flight. And as I sat on the plane, like I traveled to like 60 countries before my oldest son was born. So I got used to just taking off, landing. It was no big deal. I was having a lot of fun. But this time something was different. Like as I was in the seat and I clicked the seatbelt, all of a sudden, like my like I got nervous and my nose started sweating, and I just all of a sudden it didn't feel right. I got really nervous and I was like, oh my God, well, wait, hang on a second. What happens if this plane is getting ready to take off, never lands, or it doesn't land in the way that we think that it's going to land? Or then I remember even getting on a train going from Barcelona to Madrid and thinking, wow, if the train kind of derails, then what happens to the family? And so all of these thoughts that I wanted to, be able to control, or all of, as I'd done something so many times like flying or getting on a train, it never made a difference. But this time, getting on transportation, like long haul transportation, it made me nervous. I got this panic. I got this fear of, oh my gosh, what happens if? Because now I had a child, and I was thinking to myself, well, I've got all these fears, I've got all these nerves, but then I started remembering, like, there are a lot of executives that were working at the company that I was working at, and they were traveling even more than me, and they seemed to be doing just fine. So it kind of helped me realize, like, maybe I'm just in my own brain. But at the same time, I still had this uneasiness because I was like, I've been doing all this work, started to accumulate assets, started to be able to really enjoy the corporate life, even though I was still moving up, and that was my main focus at the time, is move up and up and up. I realized that I didn't have my house in order. Like, what if something were to happen to me one day? What would happen to the kids, and what would happen to the assets that I'd actually amassed? And so I remember this really good mentor of mine. He introduced me to a guy who I ended up investing with into some financial products and stuff like that. And but that guy introduced me to someone else who helped me with something called estate planning. Now, keep in mind, I'm a lower middle class kid. Even though I'd started to, be in this new realm and making a lot of money, I didn't have the, like, let's talk about money, let's talk about wealth, let's talk about generational wealth. Like, that was never a topic of conversation. So this whole estate planning was like brand new for me. And so as I got the introduction, I talked to this guy. I had some questions. They're very basic questions because I'd never been through it before. I was really unfamiliar with it. And what I realized is that there are a lot of things that I didn't really understand. And one of them, and just anecdotally, was a trust. And I remember growing up and people, like, I'd go, oh, they're a trust fund baby. And that in my mind just meant that they were someone who was really, really wealthy. What I then, after getting educated, understood was it's a really tragic situation if someone is truly a trust fund baby. I mean, financially, yes, they have um, the financial means to take care of themselves, maybe, uh, but they don't have either one of their parents typically. And so that, as part of this education process for me and going through this estate planning process, was really eye opening. And so as I started going through this process, then the nerves started picking up again, because as I kept continued to travel, I realized how much I didn't actually have in order. And at the time, I brought in my wife at the time, and we talked about, what would happen if both neither of the two of us were there, and how we would take care of the kids and guardianship and financial resources, and all those kinds of things. So as I was building this estate plan and had the trips and the travel, I realized that there were moments that I was missing, but then there were also too that there were parts of the house that were not in order, and I had to get those parts of the house in order. And so over time, was able to finally get the estate plan completed, and something else happened, right? I started recognizing that through this process, I stayed on the path of making sure that I was home every weekend, and that was something that was really, really good, and started to have less trips to be more present at home. But more importantly, I realized that there was a clear way that I'd learned how to keep my house in order in the unlikely event that something were to have happened to me, or something were to happen to me. Like, that was the big takeaway. It wasn't the fear of getting on the plane. It was the fear of either missing moments or the fear of not having my house in order. But when I realized that I was in control of whether or not it was traveling more or less, depending on the priorities that I gave to my company or to my own side hustle later on, but also understanding that there's a process to be able to future proof or protect in the unlikely event that I was away. And so as I went through this understanding, I started realizing that there are specific legal documents, like a last will and testament, that has a specific purpose. There is different types of trust. There's irrevocable trust. There's revocable living trusts that have a specific role. And if you're someone that is married to someone who is not a U.S. citizen, there are even documents like a QDOT, or a qualified domestic trust, which are different types of legal documents or vehicles that you can actually use. And the reason I'm sharing this is I didn't understand at the time, but I didn't have to be fearful of getting on a plane because I could keep my house in order. And I could also have more control over when I was traveling, when I wasn't traveling. So that's what I want to share with you is that going through this feeling, especially if you are a young parent, you are a young father, and you're worried about these things, there's certain parts, yes, you're going to be emotionally maybe concerned. At the same time, you can take very proactive steps to be able to keep your house in order and future proof the life and the lifestyle that you want to have for your family, for your kids. So because I hear this week after week, and it's something that is a common like theme that comes up, I just thought it was worth it to stop here and to share it with you here on the Going Long podcast. So hopefully this has been really, really helpful. If it has been helpful, share it with your friends, share it with your family, get together, talk about, this whole estate planning and why you don't need to be fearful of getting on planes anymore, especially if you're a kid who comes from a lower middle-class family, and now you've got it into this executive life and you've got a successful small business moving forward. It's just a matter of getting familiar with it. So like I said, take the episode, share it with family, share it with friends, and keep the conversation started. And so while you're doing that, I'll be here preparing for the next episode. So until then, go out and make it a great day. And thank you very much. Today's conversation was sponsored by the Billy Keels Advisory Program. If you're looking to make your 9-to-5 optional and need some help, just go to billykeels.com/advising. Once again, that's billykeels.com/advising.